just want to, thank Tsago and the team for inviting me. I don't take this lightly, and it's such an encouragement for me to be here and to also just see how God is restoring marriages in our generation. That there's been just a hunger for retelling the story of marriage in more realistic and healthy ways. And so Tsago's platform, what we're doing as well, and there's a couple of other Christians who've risen and have taken on the responsibility and the call seriously to want to retell the story of marriages in a realistic and healthy way. And I think the important thing again is to speak from the gifts that we have. So one of my gifts is being a husband, and so I have to honor and be faithful to that and speak from that vantage. And so, yeah, I think this is such a great thing that's happening. And I just want to, shout out to Tsago, her team, and just the vision that she has and all the stuff that she's been doing. So I know maybe some of you are regulars, you've been here before, and I trust that you've grown, you've been encouraged, and your marriages will benefit that much more just from being part of this. And there's going to be people around you, and maybe even some immediate people like your children or work colleagues or family members who will benefit from how healthy your marriages are becoming because of such platforms. So thank you. I'm not gonna dwell much on who I am, but I think first and foremost, disciple of Jesus, love him, been a follower of him for a couple of years now. Married to, I think, by far the hottest woman in the world, and that's my wife, Lily. She's my dark-skinned chocolate, and we have a little dark-skinned chocolate by the name of Zaya Nomlilo. She's 5 years, turning 6 next year in March, and Lily and I have known each other for over 17 years, maybe even more, but I've been married for 10 of those years. We've actually hit our 10th year this year, and next year, March, we're hitting 11 years. I'm also a full-time pastor at a church in Midrand called Christ Church Midrand. I'm the young adults pastor, so that's looking after young professionals who just entered the corporate world and young families. So that's the group that I look after. And then I run a business with my wife and a friend of ours called Company X Films. So part of my background is I studied film. In fact, that's where I met my wife at film school. And we run this production company, and that's what we use to produce the current podcast that I'm involved in called That Husband Podcast. Our channel is called the Dream Space on YouTube, so you can find that, or you can just search for That Husband Podcast, and you'll find us on TikTok, you'll find us on YouTube, and you'll find us on Instagram as well. So that's roughly about me, and again, just privileged to be here, to be meeting all of you and speaking to you tonight. So, Tsago, I don't know if I jump straight into it now, or you're gonna do something in between before I get rambling with my talk.
No, you can, hit on it, and then we will just post questions on the chat box when you're done, and then we can engage on Q&A.
Cool, that's great. So I'll turn off my camera just for better signal, and then I'll just continue. Cool. So, there's a, and this is what I like about Tsago as well, that she gave me a blank canvas of things to talk about, and so the thing that's has my heart gripped, and the passion of mine is speaking about the importance of dreams, and particularly for people who are married, that we don't leave that conversation unhad, because sometimes we speak about our dreams as individuals, and so then when we become one with somebody else, we tend to kind of put those conversations in the back burner, and later on they come back to bite us. And so I'm going to be speaking roughly around the subject of how your individual dream becomes your family dream or your marital dream now that you are in a union with somebody else. I'm gonna just start off with a bit of background before I jump straight into it. So for a bit of context, I was born to a teenage mother who was 15 when she had me, and my father was 20 years old when I was born. So I came from such humble beginnings, such rich beginnings, and in fact, where I grew up, I was the only child in my extended family and even in the community that I found myself in who had a present father. And so my father was a superhero when I was growing up, a man who poured much into our lives, who poured into my mother, who loved my mother visibly, publicly, was super affectionate with her. And I found my cues of how to love from how he displayed love with my we weren't financially well-off family to begin off with, and so even my my father's work ethic was right in front of me, and so the importance of work and the value of education and how I see the world came from him, and so that was such an important thing that shaped me. Age 15, my father left. So it literally was a day and night situation where I grew up with this hero, and then at age 15, he separated from my mother. 4 years later, they officially got a divorce. And obviously, that rocked my world. And I always describe it in this way, that he trained me to be in the world. He trained me to be a man and stand up. And the day I showed up to play the match and to get into the field, I looked on the sideline and my coach wasn't there. And so for the next 10 years, my world was shattered. My world was rocked. And I had to just navigate what it means to be a man myself. And I think not having rather a male anchor rocked my family. We're still suffering from some of those effects till today. And just having a man who's present, who anchors our vision, who anchors us as a family, we lack that. And coming from such good beginnings of somebody who laid that foundation, and for him not to carry that through was such a devastating thing. And that's the part of the heart behind why we make the podcast that we make. We want to retell the story of husbandhood in realistic and healthy ways. We want marriages in South Africa to not suffer the same blow that I suffered growing up and the blow that my mother in her marriage suffered. And so the importance of a husband who's healthy, who's present, who's leading his family is such a big passion of mine. Hence the work that we're doing with our podcast. In fact, we say as part of our slogan in our podcast that we want to see South Africa change one day. And the way we do it is to drop one episode every Wednesday at 11:30 with one husband at a time, through one marriage at a time, with one family at a time, and eventually that goodness will spill over to the country, and we will see a different society one day. The reason why I bring all of that up is 2 weeks ago, we actually dropped an episode with Pastor Koketso Mulaule, who's from Muso Church. And that episode really did well. But there was one particular segment in that whole episode where he spoke about how he did not want to wake up one day and having to realize that his wife saw him as a narcissist who crushed her dreams, who did not enable her to become all that God intended her to be. And so he said that was one of his biggest fears, and he did not want to crush his wife's dreams. That segment did really well. In fact, on TikTok, we reached over a million, so 1.4 million views on that. Actually grew our subscriber count on YouTube. It also grew our followers on TikTok astronomically, I think probably by like 40 or 50,000 new followers, because people resonate with that message of wanting to live out their dreams, of wanting to not have their dreams crushed. And I think what happens with a lot of couples is we get into marriage and then we have our dreams uncommunicated. And 4, 5 years, 10 years into marriage, we are frustrated, we are not flourishing. We get to a point where we are despondent and we are discouraged. And even worse, we are disillusioned by the institution of marriage, so much so that we want to pull out of it. And so I want to, again, speak about the importance of why we should speak about our dreams as couples, and how we find the middle ground of what this new family vision is, and what it would look like for us. In fact, here's a couple of scary stats. In South Africa, they say that over 70% of divorces happen due to unmet expectations or uncommunicated expectations. This is according to the SA Family Law Guide. And so when you hear stats like that, you would automatically think to yourself, I thought that most marriages divorce because of sex or because of money. And that's actually true, but those are presenting issues. There's an underlying poison underneath these two big issues, which is sex and money. And that underlying poison is exactly that: unmet or uncommunicated expectations. The dream that you came with into your marriage, it's not communicated, it's laying dormant, it's not being nourished, it's not being cultivated. And therefore, people end up being frustrated. And those frustrations show themselves in those two big areas, money and sex. So when a couple is arguing about money, I always say, let's pull back the layers and actually see what's the motive. And now that we're speaking about dreams, you will find that that's probably a big issue that's underlying. So we're talking about how our financial state is, but one of the spouse is arguing that our financial position is not going to change if you don't let me start this business, or really cultivate this dream or this idea I have. If you would support me in my dream, I can see how this is going to help benefit our financial position or standing in future, that we would have a better financial outcome. Or the flip side is you look at your money or your financial standing and you saying, well, it's so limited that it's not supporting my dreams, it's not supporting my passions. We don't have extra resources for us as a couple to pour into my dreams, into my passion, into my side hustle, into this thing I want to achieve. And so you end up arguing about money, but underneath that is actually uncommunicated expectations. It's these dreams that are laying dormant. Or you think about sex. Couples end up divorcing because they'll say that they're unsatisfied in the bedroom. Their needs are not being met. But again, when we pull back the layers, we start realizing that underneath that is somebody who's frustrated with their career, is somebody whose dreams are stifled, it's somebody whose dreams are not moving forward. And that frustration then shows itself up in how they show up in the bedroom. And so those are two big issues, but I dare say that underneath that, there is this poison that's sitting there: unmet expectations, uncommunicated expectations, and to be very blunt, just unmet dreams that we don't speak about. But again, this shift doesn't happen drastically. People don't wake up wanting to divorce each other, but the couple simply grows apart. Again, the individual spouse's interests change. Your career path and the ambitions in the career that you're in, or the things that you want to achieve, and even the things you believe God has called you to do, they unmet, they nurtured, and then eventually it leads to a drift. The couple grows at an individual level personally, and then that starts creating a gradual shift between them. And eventually they end up at a place where they are considering divorce. In fact, I've been in counseling sessions where this has been a very clear and a visible issue, where the wife is sitting next to the husband and she's saying, since we started our marriage, I've supported you. I've come alongside you. I've believed God for what he's doing in your life. But when I look back, You haven't supported anything I've done. You haven't spoken about my dreams. And the worst is when the wife then turns around and asks the husband, what do you think my dream is? And the husband is sitting there dumbfounded, not able to explain or even articulate what the wife's dream is. And so then it becomes an issue. Because once our dreams are unspoken of, unmet, and we don't nurture them, we don't manage them, the person whose dream is stifled, the person whose dream is being neglected, to some extent, because that's who they are, that's what God has placed in their hearts, then they feel that that's a slight on them. They feel that they're not being loved. They feel that they're not being taken care of. And so it does become such a big issue. But before we get into, how I think, because I'm really keen for us to get into the Q&A, and I want to give us practical things that we can walk away with, tools that we can even start tonight implementing with our spouses. We need to understand where this, I would say, for a lack of a better word, an obsession with dreams comes from. There's many things, so the big ultimate thing is God gives us dreams. God, who made us in his image, wants us to mirror him in this world. And so he's going to give us passions, skills, abilities, and those things are going to show themselves as we interact with the world around us. And we can say that those things are dreams of things that we want to achieve in the world. It's God showing up and using us to mirror him in this world. But besides that big reason, there's other reasons that lead us to a point where even now in marriages in 2024, we have to talk about dreams. What has happened around us culturally? What has happened with technology? What's happened with the economy that there's such a big push now on this conversation around dreams? Why did Pastor Koketso Mlalo's video do so well on our platform? Well, we need to start understanding what are some of these contributing factors. And the reason why I even bring these contributing factors is to give us tools that we can go start the conversation, if we haven't, to start the conversation with our spouse, to say, hey, man, I see your dreams. I see the passions you have. I see this purpose. But maybe let's pause before we speak about how we're going to achieve these things and dial back and ask, what has shaped this need? What has brought this thing about? Because then we can start also taking out some of the things that don't necessarily need to be there in our dream building. So there's things like selfish motives that we need to probably deal with and remove in the process of us working together as a couple to achieve whatever this dream is. And so here are just a couple of tools for us to take away. If you're taking notes, write these down, use these as conversation starters for you and your spouse. So why the strong emphasis on pursuing dreams? Well, a couple of things. The first one is cultural evolution towards individualism. So as we look around, we see that because of, again, Western thinking, there's a push, obviously a very strong push towards individualism and being about the self. And so as we look at social media, as we look at Instagram, as we look at the world around us, people position themselves to have all the spotlight on them, and everything has to be about them, their dreams, what they're achieving in the world, etc., etc. But you guys would know, as married couples, once we say I do, I need to be dying to self to think about my spouse. And so then we need to start asking the question, is my wife, is my husband making such a big deal about their dream? And maybe that's driven by this individualism. They've forgotten that they married to somebody, and they're not even willing to shape or change or even conform their individual dream to what our family dream could possibly look like, because they're so concerned about achieving this dream for themselves. So we need to pause there and think, what's really informing this pursuit of your dream? Again, it could be the cultural evolution towards individualism. Secondly, technological empowerment. So again, as we look around, technology has made the world small, it has brought things close to us. So things that, 50 years ago were rather impossible for us to do, technology has brought those things closer to us. So we can have a dream and maybe thought this thing was never going to be possible. And now that the so many technological advancements and technological empowerment, we have gotten the ability to achieve whatever dream that we want. And so then we need to ask the question, am I truly wanting to do this thing? So interrogate our own motives. Am I doing this thing because, technology has just made it possible? Is this something that I believe God has given to me? And now that I'm with somebody and I'm in a marriage with them, how is this thing gonna fit into our family vision? The flip side of that is looking at technology as a tool to empower you to achieve that. Again, 50 years ago, you probably wouldn't be able to achieve that, but now you can because of technological advancements. And so we need to sit down again and say, even as we try and speak about what this dream is going to look like, do we have to achieve it, or what technological tools we don't have? And they might force us as a couple to think deeply, and even maybe wait longer for us to see how this thing is going to be achieved. Secondly, economic and career shifts. So as things are changing around us, COVID really changed how people work. And so there might be now an angst, there might be an anxiety, there might be a nagging that sits under somebody's heart, because before COVID, they didn't even think that the thing that they wanted to achieve was possible. But now COVID changed how people work. They can work from home, they can work remotely, work has changed. And so then people's dreams are changing on how their careers will turn out. And so maybe that's a part of the conversation that we use to pause as spouses, as a couple, to say, hey, this thing wasn't there when we got married, but now it's probably here because my work environment has changed. And so then it helps the other spouse understand why this sudden urge or need for us to want to focus on this dream that you have, and for us to really make it happen. Number 4, mental health awareness, and self-fulfillment. So again, these are things that we need to be very aware of. Mental health, there's a lot of conversation around that, and it's good for us to put a spotlight on mental health and self-awareness, but what we can also do is utilize those as weapons against our spouses. So you very devoted to your dream, and you forgetting that you're married to somebody, and your dream and their dream is supposed to come together to formulate this new family dream. But you're so focused on wanting to achieve your thing that you start baptizing mental health language and weaponizing it, in fact, against your spouse. And you baptize it in Christian language, and you start again weaponizing it towards your spouse. So are you really struggling? Do you have true anxieties? Are you really frustrated that your dreams are not being met? Or this thing that you believe is in your heart is not being fulfilled, and it is affecting your mental health? Or should we just pause and realize that you might have started weaponizing mental health just so that your own individual dreams and your own desires in this marriage could be met? And then lastly, we also just need to, and as people, just investigate where our dreams come from. Some of us might have been, and this is trying to, separate the white from the rice, what I'm about to say. Some of us might have gotten our dreams because we're conditioned by our families of origin, or we're conditioned by the society we grew up in. And so the question that I'm posing there, and the question that I'm asking us to pose to ourselves and even our spouses, is how much of this dream that you have is of you? How much of this dream have you really investigated and prayed about it and come to the conclusion that this is something given to you by God, and God in his providence, in his mercy, and his grace is going to use that within your marriage so that you guys can achieve whatever this new family dream is? How much of what you're bringing is of God is of you, and or how much of it is influenced by how you grew up, and we come, obviously, we know the history of our country, where we generations before now, people were denied a lot of opportunities. And so post 94, there's this big narrative, especially in the Black community, of how we should be going out there to achieve all that we want to achieve. And some of us were told, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a teacher. And so how much of that have you taken on, that maybe you are frustrated now that that thing is not coming to life? And it's not necessarily your fault or your spouse's fault, but it's just baggage that you need to untangle and take off and investigate and open and say, how much of this is God-given, how much of it has been influenced by my family of origin and the society that I grew up in. So I think those are just a couple of points to start the conversation, if you haven't, about the dreams that you both came into the marriage with. Cultural evolution towards individualism, technological empowerment, career shifts, mental health awareness, or even parental or societal expectations. So just those couple of things to start the conversation. Why all of that? Why all of that? Here's my big thrust. Here's my big push. Here's the thing I want us to walk away with here. We both come in as spouses into our marriage with individual dreams. But as we come together, we need to start realizing that we should have a family dream. We should have a family vision, because God, in his providence, saw fit that you and your spouse will look more like Jesus if he brings you together. And part of that is he brings you with your experiences, he brings you with your dreams. And then he says, once you're together, there's something I want to achieve through you guys as a couple, as a family. There's a world that's close to you that I've placed you in, whether that's your immediate community, your extended family, the jobs that you work, and your kids that are going to grow up in your family. God wants to impact those people, and he wants to impact them through your union. And one thing he's going to use are the dreams that you came in with. And so he wants you to formulate one new family dream, so that through that family dream or through that family vision, you can then impact the world around you. So what does this mean? I think at a very basic level, we need to then start changing our language, that your dream moves away from being your dream to being our dream. So we need to shift from my dream to our dream. And that doesn't mean that your individual dream dies. It doesn't mean that, because when people hear that, they tend to think, I came into this marriage and now I need to give up this dream that I have. Well, it doesn't first and foremost necessarily mean that. It means that this dream you have is going to now take shape in new ways. It's going to find new expressions. So if you came in saying, man, I want to be, for example, the greatest engineer that South Africa has ever seen. When you were alone, that dream was going to look totally different, because there's certain freedoms that you had. There's certain accountabilities that you didn't have, people that you needed to care for, consult, look after, etc., etc. But now that your relationship status has changed and you have become one with somebody, knowing that that becoming one did not just end at the altar. At the altar, yes, we became one before God and before people, but as we do marriage, there is a becoming one, and that includes our dreams. So now I'm going to stop saying, I want to be the best engineer that South Africa has ever seen, but how is my marriage going to achieve this dream of wanting to become the best engineer? And how is God going to use that to impact the country that we find ourselves in, the community we find ourselves in? And so that dream might have to find new expressions. You might not be freely moving the same way you did when you were still single. You might have to obviously consider how you sponsor that dream now financially, because you're coming together as a family. But also, how are you becoming the best engineer for your family first, that base is going to be the thing that pours into you even some more, so that when you go out into the world, you can show up as somebody who's fully backed up by his wife or her husband, backed up by the family that you come from, backed up by the God that you're submitting your marriage to, so that you can actually be the thing that you believe God has called you to be. And so what that means is, when you're alone, yes, you could have achieved your dreams, but now that God saw fit in his wisdom, in his providence, to bring you with somebody, this dream is going to be even much more richer, right? It's gonna cause a lot of conflict. It's going to require a lot of conversation. It's going to require a lot of planning, but that's part of what God is doing in sanctifying you to become more like Jesus through your marriage, even in the area of your dreams. And so, a couple of things for us to consider as we think about what this whole thing looks like. The first thing, like I said, is embrace the shift from mine to ours. When you get married, your individual dreams, can contribute to the larger family vision. So that means we are coming up with a family vision. It means we're coming up with a family dream. If we are the newborns, that's us, that's me and my family, what do we believe God has called us to be in this world? What kind of tool are we becoming in God's hands that God is going to use to impact the world around us? In my marriage, it looks easy because we both creatives, we both come and met, in fact, at film school. And so we saw what God was doing in our individual lives. And as he brings us together, we saw how he wants us to impact the world around us. And media, we've done music with my wife for 10 years. And we dabbled in film, because once we finished school, we actually went into music. We didn't pursue film. And now, later on in our marriage, we're realizing that God is drawing us back into film, and he wants us to be tools in his hands as he impacts this new form of media, which is online media, et cetera, et cetera. And so how is he positioning us? That means there's things that I came into my marriage with wanting to achieve at an individual level, similar to my wife. But once we came together and realized, man, this is what God might be doing through us. Man, this is why God might have us together. Then we started asking the question, how do our individual dreams then become the vehicle to achieve this one big family dream? It doesn't mean I stop becoming somebody who's going to be in media. It doesn't mean my wife stops becoming somebody who's in media, but it means that those dreams find a new expression. They find new meaning. They find a new way of showing up in the world, because now she has somebody, I have somebody. I'm no longer alone. And so now we have a team, and this team has one big goal, that is going to utilize our individual goals, our individual dreams, to then achieve this one thing that we believe God has called us to. So we need to shift our language from mine to ours. And some couples have done this in many things. We speak of our finances. It's again public knowledge. My wife has struggled with depression. And so I remember when she got clinically diagnosed with depression, I said to her, it's not your depression, it's our depression. And so we utilize that language in other areas, but it's very rare that couples, again, the South African family law guide says 70% of South African marriages end because of uncommunicated or unmet expectations. So it's very rare that a couple would use the language, our dream, our vision, and actually mean it and live it out. So I think a practical step, if you've been doing this, I would encourage you to continue doing this. Press into that language. If you haven't, sit down with your spouse. Write out what both your individual dreams are. In fact, I do this with people that I do marriage counseling with, where I say to them, just have a blank canvas. Don't try and limit your dream by what you think your spouse is going to say, or prejudge yourself according to what you know about your spouse. So just have a blank canvas. if you had all the money in the world, all the time in the world, all the resources, what would your dream be? Sit down, write it down, talk about it amongst yourselves, and then say, man, as we seeing what our individual dreams are, we praying to God to help us to marry these so that there will be a family dream that emerges, that comes out of these two individual dreams, that they can become one as we are becoming one. And we can see what God is doing with us as a couple and how he wants us to show up in the world. So practically sit down, write down these things. Secondly, this is, again, like I said at the beginning, my passion is for husbands, that we would show up in a way that's going to result in the future of our marriages and ultimately the future of this country being different. And it starts with the husband. And so the husband needs to take ownership of this family vision. And we've heard this a million times in marriage seminars, at church, through sermons, podcasts, etc. But practically, what does this mean for the husband, that you need to take this family vision? Well, the husband needs to give legs to this dream. So now that we wrote down the stuff. Husband, you need to take this thing head on, give it legs. It's how you speak to your wife about it. It's how you speak to your children about it. It's how you keep it in the forefront of who we are showing up as in the world. So practically, maybe even having a roadmap for this family dream. What are our short-term goals? What are our long-term goals? What are our mid-term goals? And how are we going to adjust these things as we interact with the world around us? In fact, what me and my wife did, which was super helpful, is that at the beginning of the year, or was at the end of the year, that we get a little book, and that's going to be our diary for the year. And so that we write what our big family dream is, and obviously there's core things that are not going to change as your marriage grows. But from year to year, month to month, because of how you're interacting with the world, there's certain things that you might adjust. And so you write those things down at the beginning of the year, and we just keep on referring to that diary. Hey, remember what we said at the beginning of the year. What are the short term, what are the midterm and the long term goals? Where are we now? And here's the thing, I'll be frank with you, we're supposed to have regular check-ins, but life happens, and therefore we don't have as frequent check-ins as possible. And I, as a husband, is supposed to lead that charge. And so from time to time, though, when we do get a breather, to just say to my wife, hey, remember what we wrote down in the diary. Remember what we said here. And we've seen just slowly how that has helped us in letting these individual dreams now become one. How do we actually live out what it means to have a family vision? Number 3, it's understanding that seasons will require a shift in focus. So again, we come in with individual dreams, write them down on a blank canvas, sit together, say what is the dream that emerges. The husband takes lead and then has to constantly remind the family in how we're achieving this thing, how it's playing out in the world. Practically, the next thing means that there's going to be seasons where the wife might have to be leading charge in getting to achieving this family dream. And what that means is the wife might have to articulate and even clarify certain things at certain points. Maybe it's a season where she needs to step up in doing something, or maybe it's the husband, depending on where the shift is. So I know some families maybe have come to realize, hey, this is our dream, and how we're going to achieve it is maybe it's going to require one of us or both of us to study at some point. Okay, so let's plan for that. Maybe that's our short-term goal. Somebody has to go finish off their honors, finish off their masters. Okay, that's the short-term goal. How long is it going to take you to finish your masters? Or 2 years or a year? Okay, so if it's the wife and the wife has to go study for this year, what does this mean then for the family dynamic? What does this mean for, how we raise kids? What does this mean for us and the time we spend together? Hey, maybe the husband will need to, step up in certain areas where the wife is going to be weak in, and vice versa. There might be a season where the husband has to, be the one who's leading the charge, who's clarifying, who's articulating the thing, and the wife is then saying, hey, I'm going to fill in the gaps. Where do I need to be? And so we need to understand that there's going to be seasons where there is a shift. But the shift is not moving back into our corners where we are trying to achieve our own individual goals. No, the shift is who's clarifying the thing now, who's articulating it better, who needs to step up here. And that stepping up, that clarification, that articulation is for the sake of this one family dream that now has started to emerge. And so we need to be intentional in recognizing those seasons in our marriage. And then again, whoever needs support, the other spouse needs to be a big advocate for that. Whoever needs to be cheered on, the other spouse needs to be a cheerleader at that point. And what helps, because sometimes, the temptation is in this time when seasons are shifting, you can quickly go back into your corner and interpret that family dream as an individual dream. And then what tends to happen is people think to themselves, the one spouse thinks to themselves, man, I'm sacrificing quite a lot. My husband or wife now is doing their masters. I don't even have an honors. And then what tends to happen is resentment starts creeping. Resentment comes in. How many times am I going to sacrifice myself? How many times am I going to pull back? But the thing that helps us to fight that is, man, this is not my dream. This is our family dream. This is what God has brought us together to achieve and show up as in the world. This is who we are as the Mahlangus. This is who we are as the Vilagazis. This is who we are as fill in the blank. And I am just a team member right now playing a different role because the season has shifted. There's a change. And so I need to fight back that temptation to think this is my thing or this is his thing or her thing, and fighting that so that we don't end up in our individual corners. Number 4, we need to partner well. Partner well, husbands, partner well with your wife. If the wife rather is the helper, that means husband, we are helping the wife in her role, in her gifting, by, again, just clarifying what this vision is, putting out the roadmap so that the wife is empowered to fill in the gaps and be the helper that God has called her to be. So the things that you're going to overlook as the person who's in charge of this vision. And so when you overlook those things, your wife can only fill in those gaps if she knows what you've overlooked. And so we need to communicate it, at least to a great detail, as God graces us, as possible as it can be, to say, hey, here's what the family dream is, the family vision looks like. Here's where we're going, short-term, long-term, mid-term, so that when I'm dropping balls as a husband, my wife knows where to come in and help. And this also means that the wife knows exactly what's going on. We both, in fact, know exactly what is happening in us achieving this family dream or family vision, or even living it out at all times. So lines of communication are constantly open between us. Just a way of time, so maybe let me speed through the next couple of things. So then number 5 is, having to anchor this vision, again, in God's purpose. So we constantly need to be asking ourselves so that we are not going back and retreating into our individual corners. What is God's purpose for us as a couple? Why has God brought us together? With the gifts that he's given us as individuals, how are those gifts supposed to find expression in our marriage? How are we supposed to use this to achieve and glorify God ultimately and achieve the purpose that he has called us for? 1, that's to sanctify us, but 2, there's something he wants us to do for the environment that we find ourselves in. So what is that? We constantly need to remind ourselves. And number 6, lastly, husbands, that we are leading as servants, and not leading as dictators. We're not leading as those who are demanding control, but part of what makes us makes the journey to achieving this family goal, or even living it out, what makes it a joy, what makes it a wonderful experience is us laying down our lives so that our wives can feel cared for, can feel seen, can feel heard and listened to. That also helps with the temptation whenever she feels the need to retreat and go into her corner and make the family dream all about herself, and vice versa. That if you're leading as a servant husband, it makes it hard for you if you're genuinely coming through as a servant. It's hard for you to then make that dream all about yourself because you know that you are leading as a servant and you're just playing a part in how God is using both of you to achieve this dream that He wants to use to impact the world around you. So it's hard for you to show up as arrogant. It's hard for you to show up as pompous because you're a servant. And so I think that's such an important thing to keep in mind there. And then lastly, let me end here. What happens if we come together, we do the task of sitting down, having a blank canvas and writing down our dreams, and we trying to formulate this new family dream, this new family vision, but nothing is emerging. And the more we sit down, the more we pray, the more we try and wrestle, the more we try and put things, it's becoming very clear that one of us needs to give up their dream. That is a hard thing. But believe that sometimes God does that He calls two people together and He gave you a dream, and your dream was good for your single season. For when you were unmarried, that dream was good for you, and God used it to achieve His purposes, to sanctify you, to make you look more like Jesus. And now that He's shifted you and has placed you in a marriage, He Himself, the one who gives the gift, the one who is the inventor, suddenly says you need to let go of the invention. The gift giver says you need to let go of that gift. Why? Because I want to give you a new one with this person that I'm calling you to be with. That's going to be a harder thing to do. That's going to be a harder thing to deal with. And so we would need a lot of prayer, a lot of grace, a lot of patience, that as we coming together, and we've done the work, we've investigated, is this thing selfish? Are you trying to just achieve this thing and forget that we're supposed to be together? No. And we realize, okay, all our intentions are good. Again, sit down, write down the family vision. Man, it just feels over and over that I need to give up this thing. And this new dream that's emerging is going to emerge without my individual dream as part of this thing. So how do I let go of that? And so we need to be encouraged in moments like that, and look at the cross, look at Jesus as an ultimate example for us. He Himself at the Garden of Gethsemane says one of the most sobering lines in all of Scripture. He says to God, if this is your will, right, let it be done, not mine but yours. I'd want you to take this cup away from me, but if it's not your will, man, I'd rather do your will, God. And at some point when we coming with all our dreams into our marriage, and we come to a point of realizing after doing the hard work that God is saying it's time for you to let go of that dream so that a new one can be birthed in you as you come together with your spouse for the sake of a family vision, for the sake of a family dream, that we would remember Jesus and say, if He could say not His will but God's will, if He could submit to God in that way, we can trust Him. We can surrender to God, to Christ, and say, we want your will to reign over us. I love the gift you've given me. I love the dream that you placed in my heart. But now that I'm getting married, it seems as though you are saying I need to give that thing up for the sake of a new dream being birthed in me. And as spouses, we're going to have to work together, walk together, be gracious, be patient, be loving towards each other when it comes to all of that. Let me end there. I've said a mouthful. There's probably, again, a lot of questions, maybe some thoughts, some pushback, and yeah, let's just hear what the feedback is. Cool.
Sure. This is a very deep deep topic. I wish I could screenshot the wives group right now. It's on fire. There's so many questions on the group, and I'll try my level best to ask them, and we just flow with the conversation that is going on WhatsApp group right now. Yeah, we didn't see this one coming, so we did not see this one coming. And thank you so much for this. I'm just gonna scroll down. Okay, ladies, you can stop typing so I don't lose the trail of questions. I don't lose the trail of questions. Okay, I just want to start with the first one, because of time, so that we can just flow through with them.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Or I'm gonna allow, if they are comfortable asking. We'll start with Linda, your question, if you're still on the line. If you can ask that and maybe, yeah, elaborate more on it.
Hi. So my question was, you were saying, Jorge, um, we shouldn't weaponize mental health or spiritual. I don't quite remember how you put it, but spiritual language.
Yeah.
When trying to perhaps meet each other halfway or whatever the case is. So I didn't quite understand what you mean by weaponizing mental health and spiritual language. Please
Sure.
elaborate.
Fair. That's fair. So let's say we get to a situation where you realize that you're frustrated in your marriage, and that's obviously affecting your mental health. You might have anxiety. There might be other things that emerge from that. In the wide spectrum of what mental health will look like. And so then you start sitting with yourself, and then you realize part of what's making me depressed, part of what's heightening my bipolar, part of what's just causing my anxiety to not just be normal but extreme, is the fact that I have unmet dreams, is the fact that I have dreams that are dormant. I have things that God has given me, and He's brought me into this marriage. And I was supposed to sit down with my husband in your case, so that we can figure out how my individual dream will suddenly benefit the family dream. We haven't done all of that stuff. So now I'm frustrated, right? And so in that case, I'm saying it's good to have that conversation, to say, here's the presenting issue. I am struggling mentally because my ambitions, my dreams, my goals haven't been met. And that would cause anybody to be depressed. In fact, that's part of my wife's story, and how she, her depression was always underlying, was always there. But came 2020, where we could not tour anymore, we could not perform as musicians, and there's things that we both wanted to achieve in our careers for the sake of our family, that 2020 crushed. And so all those underlying things then suddenly came up, and then it was her mental health was challenged. And so that's a real thing. But the thing I was talking about is, you take that scenario, and because of how mental health is spoken of so much online, that the spouse then suddenly becomes disingenuous, and you're not actually suffering with severe depression, or you don't have severe anxiety, but you start wanting to force your husband to achieve your dreams, that you haven't even done the work of saying, how do I marry my dream into the family vision, the family dream? But you so frustrated with yourself that you want to achieve your own dream, and then you want to force your husband to forsake his dreams, to forsake the family vision and family dream, to achieve your thing. And when you realizing that he's resisting, because he can tell, man, this sounds selfish, this sounds like it's very individualistic, this doesn't sound like something that's going to benefit us as a family, and it doesn't even sound godlike, that you start then using mental health language as a way to try and twist his arm. Well, if you don't support this dream, I went to see my my psychologist or my psychiatrist and they say this is going to lead to severe depression. Or you even say, man, I'm becoming depressed right now because you are not supporting me in this thing. If we pause and actually start investigating, you're probably not struggling with real depression. You're probably not struggling with, severe mental health. All of us as humans at some level, we will have mental health issues because we have a mind and we live in a world that's broken. And so once that world comes in contact with our minds, we are at some level going to have mental health issues. But you can start weaponizing that to try and twist your husband's arm so that he can forsake family vision, family dream. He can forsake his own dreams for the sake of wanting to achieve your thing. And then later on, he becomes frustrated because he's given himself at the altar of serving your individual dream. And then you start realizing years later, man, he's dying and you dying because you, again, wanted him to serve at your altar. And that's not what God has called us to. If God wanted you to achieve your dreams alone, he wouldn't have given you the gift of marriage. He would have let you achieve that alone. But he sees fit in his provision, he sees fit in his plans that how Linda is going to show up as the person that God intends you to be is through bringing you with your husband. And so he's not unwise that he would give you marriage and then turn around and say, well, forsake your marriage, go focus on your own individual dreams and do this thing alone. So the caution there was, let's actually sit down with our spouses and ask yourself, am I truly depressed that my dreams are not being met? Or am I just using this as an excuse? I'm weaponizing mental health language against my husband. So that was the thing.
Sure. Thank you for that. Okay, we have another question. So what if my partner doesn't even know what are his dreams? Am I allowed to sell him my dream?
Yeah, that's fair. In fact, before I came into the session, I was doing a counseling session with another couple. It's exactly the same scenario. The husband is like, man, I don't know what my 5-year dream is or my 10-year dream is. I'm just going year by year. And I'm just seeing what the Lord is revealing. And so in that case, I would say the wife must believe what the husband is saying. So sometimes, and I might be using very broad brushes here. And so forgive me if I'm using broad brushes. But the wife would tend to not believe that what the husband is saying is actually true, because again, in the culture we live in and all those factors I listed, of how people get to the point where they're emphasizing dreams so much, the wife might think, no, like everyone needs to have dreams. Everybody has to have dreams. Everybody, has to have a 10-year plan, etc., etc. And it's like, well, you need to believe when he tells you that he doesn't have a 10-year plan, a 5-year plan, and he's just doing this thing year by year. So the thing that I would say to the wife is, one, believe him. Secondly, keep him accountable to that. So don't just, because if God has called the husband to lead and take care of the family vision, part of his makeup of not having his own personal dream is God has probably wired him that way, and God now is using that to his mind is free. He's not even thinking about himself. He came into this thing not having a dream for himself, but now he's, quote unquote, his dream is going to be the family dream. His dream is going to be the family vision. And so as you articulate your dream to him as the wife, he needs to come alongside you and say, I might not have a personal thing, but I'm hearing what God has planted in your heart. So how are we going to use that as the basis of coming up with what our family vision is? And I'm wired to think, annually. I'm not wired to think longer than that. So then the wife will have to say, okay, you need to come up then with a plan for the year. So with how God has wired you, you think, on the spot, you think year to year, you very systematic, you plan in detail. And maybe that's why God has given you a brain to just think for a year. So I'm going to keep you accountable. How do we take this thing that God has given me as the wife, and now that has brought me with you, this thing is ours. It's no longer mine as the wife, but it's ours. And I'm giving it in your hands so that you can shape it that it will benefit us as a family. So that includes him, it includes you, it includes the kids that you're going to have. And another thing we never think about, which I've said in the talk, is whatever family dream we come up with is not just for us as a family, but God is using it to impact the people around us. So this dream that the wife came in with, the husband takes it, puts it into a spreadsheet, as it were. We come up with a family dream, and then we think, how is this going to impact both of us, our children? How is this thing going to impact the church we go to, the community we find ourselves in, the companies we work in, etc., etc. And so then he'll have to lead that charge. Yeah, hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Maybe just a follow-up question there. So what do you do now if you have been communicating that year in, year out, but no action, like 10 years in, and there's no action or some sense of direction as far
Yeah.
as the family vision is concerned? Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. So I think then the conversation that we need to have there is an accountability conversation. And I think in most cases, because if it's the wife now who's communicating and the husband is not listening, part of the arsenal that you use, or part of the tools that the wife uses now to fuel herself to have that conversation is, yo, you crushing me, or even you crushing our family, etc., etc. I would change that language. I would change those tools that you are using as motivation to broach the subject. I would change those and make it an accountability question and put it at the God level. Okay, so if you believe in God, I believe in God. Unless, husband, you believe that God is sitting in heaven and he's given us all of this world and he's given us gifts, talents, ambitions, dreams, and visions, all of that just for the sake of curing his boredom. If God is bored in heaven and he's just like, I've given you all the stuff for no reason, no purpose, I am just bored. Right? So as the wife, I would take it to that level and say, you then explain to me what kind of God you serve. If you're serving a God who gives us all of these things aimlessly, who gives us all of these things purposelessly, then sure, right? There's no other level after that I can keep you accountable with. I would even say at that point, yes, he's still your husband and you have to always treat him as your husband. But he's also, and more importantly, I would even argue, a brother in Christ. And so you need to go to him as a sister in Christ now and say, listen, as your sister in Christ, do you think that this is what our dad wants? For his sons, if you are truly his son, for his sons to just be dormant, for his sons to not have a family vision, for his sons not to, have been meaningfully working in this world. So I need to take the conversation to that level and put him to account at that level. And then I think, secondly, after that, a practical thing, if he takes that, right, and I pray he does. So after that, the role of the wife is to be a helper. So, man, how can I help you practically work this thing out? So you need to tell me now what are practical things I can do to help you, right? So give you an example with us. And we're not doing this stuff perfectly even in my marriage, but we came up with a family creed. We came up with a creed that we recite, or a family statement, a vision statement. So me, my wife, and my daughter, every night when we put my daughter to sleep, we recite this family vision. Right. So I lead it as the husband, and I would. So we have 6 things in that creed. This is the kind of family we are. In this family, we do this. This is how we show up in the world, etc., etc. I say that, and then my wife and my daughter repeat that. So we are a family that is prayerful. We are prayerful. We are a family that is grace-filled. We are grace-filled. We are a family that is great, and we show up in the world ABC. We are a family. So we do that all the time, every night. And then my wife said to me, here's how I'm going to help you practically. I'm going to write it down in our diary, but I'm going to go a step higher. I'm going to go print this out, laminate it, put it on our wall somewhere, so that even as we walk in the house, you as the husband can see that thing on the wall. The kids can see that, she can see that. And so there's practical steps in which she has come alongside me. As most men are forgetful, which I am as well, but she's come alongside me to say, hey man, I'm gonna help write this thing down so that we can see it all the time. So I think, one, take the accountability to a God level. Secondly, say to him, I can see your flaws, your shortcomings. How can I come in and fill in those gaps at a practical level? And then after that, you also need to then realize that you're gonna, all his shortcomings, because he's still gonna fail after that. Don't treat those as, you see, I told you, you're failing again, but treat those as opportunities to serve. So he forgets to recite the family creed, or he forgets to write down the plan. Instead of letting your heart fuel up with anger, combat that and say, man, this is an opportunity to serve. I'm going to go serve. If he's supposed to be leading this family vision with a servant heart, man, you are called to do the same thing, wife, and take these opportunities of failure on his part as opportunities of service on your part, so that and that's going to build your family vision as well. Not constantly reminding him that is failing, but showing up and serving and demonstrating in real time that you are committed to this family vision, and you want him to succeed as a leader as well. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you so much. And I think you also asked my next question, about do we include our children? I think that was clear.
Yeah.
So I have another question. So I think we are in a day and age or era where women are more driven, ambitious, they're chasing
Yes.
dreams and goals and all that. And someone asked, so what do you do when you can see that your spouse is jealous when you are pursuing your dreams and you are not being supported? Like, then what do you do?
Yeah. The simple answer is that this whole talk is about that. This whole talk is about that. Move away from it's my dream. It's supposed to be our dream. Part of what creates the jealousy is you might not say it. You might not say this is my dream, but how you carry yourself. And here's the thing again. Consider it's important for us to always consider those things that I listed. Let me try and go back to them again. So when you think of the cultural evolution towards individualism, so there's a narrative that our wives are being told by social media, by corporate SA, that listen, you don't live as a woman 50 years ago. Now there's a whole lot of opportunities. Go claim those opportunities. Go succeed. Be a boss babe, etc., etc. And that's good. As a husband, I don't want my wife to be restricted. I want my wife to be the best that she can be. But she needs to remember that part of her primary identity is that she's not a woman first. She's my wife. And so she can't be listening to narratives that fuel her womanness outside of her being a wife. She's a wife. And so she needs to think with all of these opportunities that are made available. In fact, there's a psychologist we had on our podcast who made it very clear that I think 80% of her clients that are female who come into a practice, most of them complain about one thing. They're making more money than their husbands and their husbands are jealous. And so she has to remind them again that as you go out into corporate SA, as you achieve your dreams and you become the best entrepreneur, remember that you're not doing that as a boss babe first and foremost, but you're doing that as a wife. So how does your boss babeness express itself in light of what the family vision is? So whatever it is that you want to do, how am I doing that as a participant or as a partner or as a team player of our family vision? And how am I articulating that to my jealous husband? How am I reaffirming him again that this is our dream? How am I reaffirming him that, listen, if I win at this venture, we win. So my wins are not mine, but my wins are our wins. I am working for the family. And so then it's the thing that I always caution husbands with, that we can go about doing our thing and never include our wives, even in the day-to-day of how we show up in our selected field of work. So I need to include my wife. I need to figure out, and the wife, this is what I'm saying to you now. Am I going to include my husband in my diary? So if I need to plan for my week. Am I going to sit down with him and say, let's look at my diary together? Let's look at the diary together. Or am I going to include him in saying, man, I need to close this deal and I'm just going to dedicate, let's say 20 minutes. I'm going to tell you what it is. He might not even be an expert in the field that you're in, but I'm going to tell you what this thing is. And I'm going to sit here. I want you to speak into that. So I need to close this big business deal. I'm struggling with ABC. What do you think? So that he can feel involved. He can feel belonging in this dream that is actually ours and not yours alone as the wife. So find ways of how to include him. We can easily treat our wives, to Saho's point earlier, where she said now she was going to ask me about how we include our kids. Most people don't include their kids in their family vision or family dream because they think, well, what are kids going to do? They don't have resources, they don't have the experience, they don't know, they have the know-how. So what are they going to do? But we fail to realize that that's part of the legacy that God has called us to leave with our kids, that we need to bring them in as we dream, as we plan, as we execute things. They're going to learn. All that goodness is going to spill over them. And so then spouses will tend to treat their other spouse in the same way. You treat your husband as, he's like a kid. What does he know? He doesn't even know my field of expertise. He's not even involved in this industry that I'm in. What does he know? Well, he might feel that. You might not say it with language, but he'll feel that in how you exclude him with your actions. And then you giving Satan leeway to really just pull at the strings of jealousy in his heart. So as his jealousy is aroused, part of what enables that jealousy to be fully blown is you have closed the door to include him. So find ways. Man, I'm going to sit in once a week or twice a week where I'm just going to tell you about this business I'm part of, or I'm going to tell you about the office that I work in, and I need you to speak into that. Even if you're not speaking into that, I just need you to know. And then say to him, part of what helps us to fight jealousy, here's my deal that I'm trying to close. Here's my office culture. But from that, here are 4 prayer points. Here are 3 prayer points. Somebody who is jealous, the best remedy to cure their jealousy is to pray for you. Right? Nobody's going to go to God with a genuine heart of wanting to pray before God, and their hearts is just full of jealousy, and they sucking on that jealousy juice. They're going to try and kill that jealousy juice before they go before the Lord so that they can pray. You can even try and kill that jealousy juice right now. As we're sitting, here are 4 points that I'd want you to pray for. Maybe let's just pray for this first point together. Pray over me as my leader, as my husband, as the head of our house, as the person who's going to be held accountable for our family dream. Pray over me. That kills the jealousy in his heart. That kills all of that stuff in real time, so that he can realize for himself, wow, like I actually have a part in this. I am a team member. As much as my wife, this might be a season shift where she's the one who's articulating the thing, bringing the clarity. She knows more here, but I belong. This is our dream. Your husband can go stand on a stage somewhere and say, this is our family dream. And people might ask him, what does, like, explain the intricacies of your wife's industry. I don't know what the intricacies are, but I can tell you why this is our dream. Here's how I'm involved. Here's what my wife is doing. Here's how that thing is speaking into our family dream, into our family vision. And here's why God is going to be glorified. Here's why the world around us is going to be impacted by what we are doing. And my wife is playing such a big role in this thing. So yeah, hopefully that is helpful.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much. And also thank you for affirming us. So one of the pillars for Suitable Helper that we have is like a business network for wives. We call it Wifepreneur, and it just assures us of the name when you said you're not doing it as a boss babe, but as a wife.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a story or our motto. That should be our motto, and to remember
Yeah.
that as much as we're hustling or we bring in more money than our husbands, we need to remember our position in the house. So, but just a follow-up question on that, ne? So I bring more money in the house, for example, and yeah, helping my husband provide for the family vision and everything. And when God opens the door for them to now, provide, so their money remains their money, and my money is the family money. So then how? And I think one wife mentioned that I'm always broke, but you know, I'm the one, like maybe help him provide in the family. And when the husband gets whatever they get, it's theirs. It doesn't contribute towards the family vision. So, like, what do you do in that instance? Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I think that's when we have hard conversations. We take the accountability to a God level. One, whatever money that comes into, okay, let me be very deliberate with the language. Whatever money comes into our account is first and foremost not our money. It is God's money. God is the one who gave us this resource. It belongs to him. In fact, God wants you and I to be managers. God, in his grace, in his mercy, in his providence, saw fit that I could not handle his money alone. And so he wants me to handle his money with my wife. He saw fit that my wife couldn't handle his money alone. And so he gives me as a husband to my wife so that my wife can manage God's money with a husband. And so we need to take that to a God level. We need to be frank. We need to be open. We need to be brutally honest. We can't, faff around the bush. We have to be direct on that because, again, as I said in the beginning, you would assume that the biggest killers for marriage is money and sex. And yes, those are the biggest presenting issue. But like I said, there's this poison that's underneath of uncommunicated expectations, dormant dreams, unsatisfied, unfulfilled dreams. And so part of that is, like you said rightly now, when the husband seems to have his dreams popping and then he makes money, then he thinks he can have an up over you. So we need to squash that quickly. Take it to a God level. This is not your money. God is going to hold you accountable for how you handled his money. God is going to call you into account for how you handled his resources. So together we are supposed to be managers of God's money. And what God is doing with the money he's given us is he wants us to look after his world with that money. And he also says we can eat some of that money for ourselves. So when that money comes into our account, if we have a godly vision, we have a family vision, we have a unified vision, we know that that vision is ultimately supposed to glorify God. So with our resources, man, we need to glorify God. How do we glorify God? With the money he's entrusted us with as managers, not as owners. We don't own God's money. We manage it. How do we manage it in a way that's glorifying to him? Secondly, how is what's left going to benefit us? How is that going to fulfill and even speak more into this family dream, into this family vision? And how can we take care of ourselves through the money that God has blessed us with after we have taken care of the needs that God has called us to together as a family, whether that's tithing at your church, whether that's looking after some form of charity, whether that is helping people around you. But you're going to have to determine again together as a family, as the Mahlangos, as the Ngubanes, as the Kobedis, whatever we are, how are we supposed to manage God's money? Part of our family dream and vision is how are we going to manage God's money in a way that's faithful? And we need to determine where that's going to go. And then secondly, what's left, how we're going to look after ourselves. But I'll say this again, that kind of behavior should not be tolerated. We cannot dance around that stuff because, again, money gives people power. And Jesus is very clear. You cannot serve God and money because you're going to hate the one and you're going to love the other. And so in this case, if your husband is already hiding some money or even taking money away from the family or even considering that money that belongs to God as his worse even over you, then he's already demonstrated that what Jesus has cautioned us with, he's fallen into that temptation. He's worshipped money more than God. And God says that's not going to end well. That's not going to end easy. And so we need to have a frank conversation. You're not just messing up our finances here, husband, but you are messing with God's money. You are messing with God's resource, and God does not take that thing lightly. It's what he says in First Peter, where he says, you know, if the husband does not take care of the wife, his prayers are not going to be answered. And so even that is a sobering caution for the husband to say, sobering warning. If you're going to lord your money over your wife, man, you're going to get into trouble with God. And then the flip side of that is what happens if the wife then gets more money? You have trained her to treat money the same way you've lorded over her. There's more to say on that, you know. We could go to Genesis 3 and how Eve and Adam's dynamic worked out the same way. Because when God comes and speaks to Adam, and Adam blames Eve, Eve picks that pattern of behavior, and then she blames the serpent, meaning part of how our wives show up in the world, God has placed us as husbands so that our wives would mirror godly character from us as husbands. And if we're not careful, they will mirror ungodly characters or behavior from us. And so the husband mustn't be surprised later when the wife does the same thing, because she's mirroring your ungodly character and behavior that you've demonstrated before her. So yeah, we can't faff around that one. That's a big direct one. We need to nip and just go straight for its head and kill it, because that ends up in a lot of hot mess and a disaster.
Sure. Thank you so much. Right now, I'm thinking of a joint account. Okay. We have a hand from Mrs. M.
Yes, Kin
Sure.
leadership. Thank you. So my question is this: what is the role that compatibility plays in terms of aligning dreams to each other? How big is it, or how do we work around it?
Yeah. I might rattle your mind a bit, but I try and refrain and even move away. I would even delete the language of compatibility, and here's why. Because the question I always ask behind the thinking of what compatibility is who becomes the standard that you are using to determine if the other spouse is compatible? Okay, I'll say that again. Who are you using as a standard to determine if the other spouse is compatible? And the answer is, I am using myself as the standard, right? Because who am I saying this person is compatible to, if not me? And so then what happens if I change? So if the standard changes, that means I might even in the future not be compatible to my spouse because I've used myself as a standard. And so I move away from the language of compatibility because that makes us treat our spouses more like products and less like image bearers, people who are made in the image of God. Because I'll give you an example now. My pockets right now are compatible to the car I drive. But once my pockets grow and I have more money, then the car I drive now is no longer compatible to my pockets, or my pockets are no longer compatible to that car. So I need to then find a car that's more compatible to my pockets. Why? Because my pockets were the standard to determine what kind of product I can afford. But a human is more complex. A spouse is more delicate. A spouse is somebody who comes in again with their dreams, their ambitions, their background, their own ways of seeing the world. And we need to work hard to find a suitable and a new family dream now and a new family vision. So the thing that we're going to use as a standard to see if we are supposed to be together is Jesus. It's the gospel. It's God. That's what we are using primarily. And that's why even in the past 2 or 3 questions, I said, raise the temperature, take it to the God level, because that's the standard that will never change. That's the standard that remains the same. So what tends to happen as well with Christian couples is we come in and we saying we want to worship the Lord with our marriage. God, we thank you so much for giving us our marriages, for giving us our spouses, and we worship you, we want to serve you, etc., etc. And then marriage gets hot, as we all know. And suddenly we move from that standard and we start using the world around us to determine whether we are still supposed to be together. And so we need to always go back to that God level. We always need to take it back to the gospel. Hey, listen, my husband is struggling to be a leader. Who am I going to use as a standard of leadership? Jesus. My husband is struggling to sacrifice and actually be a servant leader. Who am I going to use as a standard? Jesus. My husband is struggling to love. Who am I going to use as a standard? Not me. Because again, we speak about love languages. Your love language could be one thing now. And by the time you turn 40, you have more kids, life has happened, there's other things, you have new needs, new demands, your love language changes. So if we're going to use your love language as the standard to determine what our love is together as a couple, man, then we always have a moving target. But we always need to go back to the gospel. We always need to go back to that God level. We always need to go back to the scriptures. So I refrain from compatibility. I refrain from thinking like that. Last thing I'll say, because I also speak unquote uncompatible. So I'm big picture and she's more detail orientated when it comes to the things of life. So my wife, I always make a joke that she's a glorified drug dealer, meaning that if you're sick and you tell my wife what your symptoms are, she will know exactly what kind of medication you need to get, and she'll tell you the ingredients behind that bottle. And she knows what pharmaceutical company produced that thing. Like, she knows. I think my daughter is alive because of God's grace and my wife's obsession with medicine, right? And I'm not. I'm the typical black guy. You sick, or Panado or grandpa. That's as far as I go. And so one day I had to take my daughter to the dentist, and I was sitting with my daughter at the dentist. And the dentist was just, speaking to me about what she's gonna do, etc., etc. And it's in that moment I realized, had I spoke about compatibility or even wanted to shape my marriage around compatibility, I was gonna try and find somebody who's compatible in all the ways I see fit for myself. That here, me and my wife are total opposites in this area where she cares so much about medicine and I don't. And here in this moment, this very thing that I know nothing about, and I'm not compatible to my wife, and she thinks I'm not compatible to her, she's not compatible to me, has saved our daughter, has worked well for our daughter. Why? Because I saw my wife as an image bearer. I saw my wife as somebody in all her complexities, in all her wonders, her quirks, her dreams, her ambitions, as somebody who is representing who God is in this world, and particularly in our marriage. And so I'm going to take all of her. When I'm frustrated with her quirks, I go back to who Jesus is. I say, Lord, I know you're doing something with my wife here. This thing is frustrating me. And the thing that Jesus says back through his word to me is, man, is this an opportunity for you to serve? It's not something that you fit well, or your wife is not fitting well in. Is this an opportunity for you to serve? Is this an opportunity for you to die to yourself and become more like me, Jesus says, so that you can love your wife, and vice versa to my wife? Jesus is saying that. So we're using him as a standard and not each other, so yeah.